good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another AgilQuest Workplace Leaders webinar series. We've got a really exciting webinar today. We've got two different perspectives in building your business case. We've got the portfolio strategy perspective and getting to high-performance work, as well as the economics of one of the most important pieces of workplace change. And we've got time for questions and answers at the end. So it's going to be a great presentation today. Our presenters today are subject matter experts OMara from Corporate Portfolio Analytics and Fahy from AgilQuest. Martha is going to be presenting on the portfolio strategy side. She's the co-founder and managing director of Corporate Portfolio Analytics, a company that serves some of the biggest companies in the United States in the financial, professional services, and technology sectors, with domestic portfolios ranging from under 4 million to more than 70 million square feet. So they influence occupancy decisions for more than 60 million square feet of commercial space. Now, Dr. OMara also lectures in real estate executive development at Harvard University Graduate School of Design, and she served there as a professor of real estate for 9 years. Her PhD, MBA, and MA were awarded by Harvard University, and she's the author of the book Strategy in Place, Managing Corporate Real Estate and Facilities for Competitive Advantage. Now, Fahy is the Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer here at AgilQuest. He also manages AgilQuest's Global Professional Service Division, which implements and supports all of AgilQuest solutions, helping customers optimize their real estate portfolios. Prior to joining AgilQuest, he was CFO of several technology startups and a senior manager for KPMG in the Information and Communications practice. He has a BSBA specializing in accounting and MIS from Ohio State University, and he was awarded his CPA license by the state of Ohio. So they're going to be presenting the two different perspectives today in our building the business case for hoteling, the dollars and the strategy. So without further ado, we're going to turn the presentation over to Martha OMara and the portfolio strategy perspective. Martha?
Great. Thank you so much. Well, it's a pleasure to be on the call today, and thank you to AgilQuest for inviting our company, Corporate Portfolio Analytics, to participate. What I'd like to do in about 25 minutes time is walk you through some of the types of analysis we do with our clients in helping them understand how they're using space in their portfolio and how to build the business case for reducing the portfolio by really identifying where they're not using space effectively through a number of metrics and benchmarks. So a couple things just to kind of as table stakes here. One is, no wonder there's so many people on the WebEx today, we're all seeing that work styles are changing and mobility tools are becoming faster and cheaper. That means that people are using individual office space less and collaborative space more. And they're also spending more time in out-of-office locations. So I know there's been a lot of controversy over there about, quote-unquote telework, but as we'll see a little bit further in the presentation, there are many, many different ways of accommodating office workers today. But what I think we're really getting out of is what I like to refer to as the bud in the box, all right? And so once you get out of the bud in the box paradigm, you have a number of choices about how to house your workforce, and a lot of those will require less real estate than you have today. So I think that's the biggest change we're seeing, is that we really need to focus on how work is done, the kind of work people do, the needs and demographics of the workforce, and design the right kinds of workplace to support what they need to do in order to help your company build and maintain a competitive advantage. Coincidentally, that process also tends to highlight a lot of underutilized space. But rather than the first generation of going out there and just trying to get rid of space for cost-cutting purposes only, this is really trying to make the most effective use of the space you have. 5 years ago, our firm came out with a research brief, and we said, 150 in 5, that companies would realize they need 40% less space. And, 5 years later, we're really seeing that. In fact, the time has come faster than we thought. One term you'll hear me use a lot today is high-performance workplaces. Don't really like the term alternative workplaces because it's no longer alternative. And our goal is to have the highest performing workplaces possible to support our employees. So today we're going to highlight on how do you determine where you have excess space, what metrics you can use, how you can alter the workplace better to support high-performance workplace practices, and particularly without spending a ton of money. I think a lot of folks think that, oh my gosh, we can't do any of this, we can't do hoteling, we can't move to, you know, more unassigned space or whatever, because we're going to have to redesign the whole workplace. And that just isn't true, and we're going to show you some simple examples of how you can change the way you work without necessarily a lot of capital investment. But sometimes, of course, there is going to be an investment, and there's also going to be a payback. The payback's going to come from exiting space you don't need, and then you're going to have to sometimes reconfigure the space that you're backfilling to, and we've seen a number of clients do that. So there can be some investment component, but there's definitely a payback analysis that shows that the real estate savings over time more than pay for the cost of renovating the backfill space, and then can generate a lot of positive cash flow. And so we'll just show you a simple example of what that payback estimate looks like. And then we're going to, and we're also going to talk about how do you estimate your future space requirements so that you can plan for lease consolidations and restacking. And we're going to give you a quick view of a dynamic demand forecasting model that Corporate Portfolio Analytics uses a lot with our clients. And then just a quick discussion of how easy or difficult it will be to exit lease space in the coming years. You know, most of the companies we work with are large portfolios, lots of moving parts, lots of locations, lots of lines of business, and usually it's a several-year process to really get your portfolio in order. For some examples of things we're seeing, a 32 million square foot national portfolio at 2012, will have taken out half of their administrative office space this year with very little headcount change, mostly through eliminating underutilized space and moving to high-performance workplace practices. We're seeing a lot of companies consolidate, large companies consolidate back into owned assets because they tend to have more capital investment in those assets, and they also tend to be located in urban centers and places where people want to work today. So we're seeing a lot of folks get out of lease space, eliminating redundant or unneeded sales and service locations. The federal government, I know we have a number of folks here from federal agencies today, lot of talk going on, a lot of policy coming out, you know, freeze the footprint. They're not approving leases over 150 usable per FTE. You know, private sector might think of that as around 180 square foot per person, mandated implementation of telework, and very, very aggressive sustainability goals. And already what we're seeing at technology companies is 100 to 150 rentable square foot in practice. So basically, overall, most companies, most large companies today have 40% too much real estate. So want to get back to this point of getting the story straight from, you know, thinking of this as an alternative or some weird fad that's going on. It really isn't. It's not. It's high performance, really providing the right kind of workplace for the work that people do. So it's not telework. I hate that term personally. It's not fuzzy slippers. It's not what we like to call butts in boxes, which means, you know, you sit in a fabric cube all day and do heads down work. If you think about it as space and time dimensions, and I've been using this slide here now for, well, really since 1990, the idea of time being whether the space is pre-assigned or assigned as needed, and whether it's individual space and group space. And if you think about this matrix, all these different approaches fall within, you know, one of these four categories. We will still always have individual offices for particular types of jobs or assigned workspaces, whether they be, you know, a hard-walled office, a cube, or benching and other ways. But you could also have assigned workspaces that are sequential, that two people might be assigned the same workspace as well. So lots of different ways to provide individual space. Individual space assigned as needed is where we get into these issues of hoteling and how to make the economic case for hoteling, but it really is a much broader array of options that you can provide your company for workplace. And also with group space, being able to assign that group space or have people have a reservation system for that group space. So I really, suggest when you get into these discussions at your companies that you take time to make sure everyone in the room really understands what they're talking about, and they're not just throwing out some telework, right? And everyone has a different picture in their head. What specifically are we talking about? What is it the work that people have to do, and how physically can they best accommodate that work? And really, what is it we're really talking about getting out of? I mean, these are photos from real clients in real offices. I don't know how many of you out there on the phone today are sitting in cubes that look like this, but really, do we really want to spend all day in an ugly fabric cube? So think about what the alternative is for many of the organizations we're talking in. So some of, Martyisms I might leave you with here are, no more butts in boxes, particularly if you're just doing heads down work. Most everyone's life runs better if they can work from home one day a week, and whether that means having a quiet day to do phone calls or to edit reports or do that heads down thoughtful work, or to have be able to make sure that you can manage your home obligations and get your work done at the same time, that can be helpful. What we're now also seeing is once people don't have to go to the office, they can get their work done in different places. All of us in corporate real estate and facilities have to work a lot harder to make sure we have a place that people want to go to. So you have to say, what's going to make people want to go to the office? And then finally, the way we structure work and the way we manage is seriously lagging this revolution in mobile work. I think that's when you see the pushback at companies about mobile work. It's really coming more from the fact that they haven't adjusted how they manage, how they supervise, how they measure performance to these new ways of working. So we're really moving from being corporate real estate strategists to place strategists, providing the right place for our organizations. And as more people work in a mobile environment, you sometimes will walk in and you won't see anybody in the office. And so by moving to hoteling and these other higher utilization work styles, you have more utilization when people are in the office and people see other people and they have that energy. So when you come, why do you want to come to the office? You want to come to see other people, to have that creative energy. And so really how we think about the job of corporate real estate and facilities is really changing. On this idea of what's your number, again, we're just seeing everyone setting more aggressive downsizing targets. But why is that? Where is this coming from? We're finding that when you go in and you look at your portfolio and you try to understand how you're using space, you often find you're using it very ineffectively. Now, this is an example of a client's portfolio it's a national portfolio. It has multiple lines of business in multiple metro areas. So we see over here in tenure, we look and along the x-axis, we see leased buildings are more efficient than the older owned buildings. One of the metrics I strongly believe people should use is just a simple square foot per FTE. Some approaches will have you look at workstations and workstation utilization, but just for portfolio strategy purposes and for highlighting where you're not utilizing your portfolio well, simple square foot per person I think is the simplest way to approach it. So, you see in this portfolio, okay, our owned property is less efficient than our leased property. That's not surprising. It probably is that owned property hasn't been remodeled or refit out for a lot longer, whereas the tenure of occupancy in the lease portfolio has probably been shorter. We also saw that across the three major lines of business, really big differences across how much square foot per person. Again, not surprisingly, the companies, parts of the company that were using the most square foot were the old legacy operations that really hadn't probably changed their business processes in a long time, but certainly hadn't changed their workplace to meet new modern business processes. Versus the internet part of the company had the red bar down there with the total portfolio had much more efficient use of space. And then finally, we saw different utilization across regions. For this particular client, a lot of that came because of mergers and acquisitions. And it will also be that there are certain places that you're going to want to pay attention to your space efficiency more carefully, and of course those are the places that are most expensive to use space. So you'll see a lot of these ideas catching on in areas like New York, in Washington, D.C., and Boston, and the Silicon Valley, where space is very, very expensive. So you also kind of want to pick and choose your battles, or you may have acquired a company that was not managing its portfolio as efficiently as you have managed the portfolio in your own set of assets. You can also do a simpler benchmark across all of your buildings. So what this example shows is a number of buildings in a client's portfolio in a particular metro area. And one of the things we also really like to show is, in helping you build the business case, is rent per occupant. Now, over here, sort of G and H, those were legacy-owned buildings on the right. But what we found was, you know, if they went to their 155 usable, and this is a case from the federal government, they could use less than half of the amount of space. And when you tell someone, look, you're using you're spending $20,000 a year on rent per person, that is more meaningful sometimes than square foot per person, because people will immediately think, well, gosh, how much am I paying those people? Wow, you know, 20% of their compensation is the equivalent of rent. You know, if we could get that number down to $6 or $8 or even, you know, $10,000 per person, we could do so many other things with that money. And that's how we started to build this business case I'm going to show you in a few minutes. So how do you get to this? It's great to say, okay, we think we have too much space per person. How do you get to these different practices? This is our All Roads Lead to Rome slide that talks about both workplace change, changing the physical workplace, as well as work style change, which is how people work. So in workplace change, if you need to increase the number of people working on a floor, you can add chairs to existing cubes. You can put some wireless in so people can work not tied to a particular location. And then you can start to renovate to increase workstation density, all the way to the higher cost, more change option, which is to renovate the entire building. But you can also make work style changes that really don't require you to move a lot of workstations or walls or buy a lot of stuff. First of all is figure out who's already teleworking and not in the office very often, and move them to unassigned, move them to hoteling. Increase the amount of telework or mobile work if the types of things that people do would be better supported through telework. And again, then you can increase your hoteling and increase that sharing of unassigned or unoccupied workstations. And then, you know, higher cost, more change, you can go to more free address, what we call really work behavior setting type of work. Okay, when I do heads down work, I go to do the quiet heads down area, and I just really need a place to plug in and have it be quiet. When I need to collaborate, I'm going to go over and work in the collaboration space. That's a little more sophisticated approach, but one we're seeing more and more frequently in more progressive types of workplaces. From a planning perspective, what is it you need to start thinking about? Well, if you sort of start today at ground zero, and okay, we have 100, you know, we have all the space we have now, and we're going to have flat head count. You typically, you know, in the old world of space planning, and believe me, I grew up doing this, you know, 30 years ago, running these space programming plans before going to business school. You know, I said, okay, we're going to grow 3% head count, or maybe we're going to plan for a 3% per year head count contraction. And you could forecast how much space you have. Now when you start to say, okay, we wake up, we need to get rid of 40% of our space, but we know it's going to take 5 years. What's that going to look like? It's going to take 5 years. How much space are we going to need over that time if head count stays flat, if head count increases? If we find ourselves downsizing this particular line of business, becoming more efficient, and reducing the amount of space per person and using more sophisticated ways of occupying space, we could wake up and need half the amount of space we need 5 years from now. So you need to, it may take you that much time to get out of space because you need to look at when your leases are expiring. And I think that's one thing a lot of the folks who talk about alternative workplace kind of miss, is that, ooh, you know, you really have to be able to make that business case for how you're going to get out of the space and what space you're going to get out of. This is a very simple payback chart. It was like, you know, you got to invest money in restacking your owned asset, doing some interior changes, but you're also going to then every year be getting out of lease space so that by year 4, this is going to have paid for itself, and every year from then, you are going to be making more money so that in 6 years, you're actually going to be saving $26 million after you've already paid for all the rework and the change in technology. So a very simple payback. The client bought into it. They have set this goal of getting their portfolio to 700,000 square feet in 10 years and are proceeding with this plan. And then finally, going back to how do you get out of space, and being that I'm from corporate portfolio analytics, we have to show you a slide with market data. One of the issues for a lot of companies is, how do I get out of the space? Once I identify that I have too much space, once I've built the business case for high-performance workplace, for hoteling, I've done all this analysis, what am I going to do? Well, you got to get out of your space. So you really do have to pay attention to the structure of your portfolio, what leases you can get out of. Do you just want to do short-term extensions when you don't know, I don't know if I can get out of this lease, the organization will be ready to get out of it in 2014 or 2015. Well, don't go sign a 5-year lease then, start to plan to get out of space. And in most markets today, we have still relatively low rents and high vacancies. So you also have to look at your portfolio and figure out what can I get out of, and that will also help you set the priorities for where you should be looking at high-performance workplace first, because if there isn't some way of showing the economic benefits as well as the operational and employee benefits, it's a harder business case to make. So let's now turn over to Matt and do a deeper dive at this point on how you would do the specific economics around a hoteling case and some of the tools that AgilQuest has to do that with.
Thank you, Marty, and welcome everyone. Good afternoon. Okay, I'd like to get into the nuts and bolts of a financial model around hoteling. But first, let me talk about hoteling as a financial strategy that leverages office space to maximize returns on your real estate portfolio. Leverage means something special to the financial community. In finance, we use leveraging as a general term for any technique to multiply gains and losses. Your home mortgage is a way that you may have used leverage in your personal finances. Organizations today are leveraging their real estate from traditional 1-to-1 to 2-to-1, and we've seen clients go up to a 14-to-1 worker-to-workspace ratio based on certain employee pools. By moving the worker-to-workspace ratio from 1.3-to-1 to 1.8-to-1, you can save hundreds of millions of dollars for your company. Hoteling transforms real estate from a fixed asset into a just-in-time variable inventory of cost space. One of our clients achieves $200 million of annual savings attributed to their hoteling program. They have continuously measured and expanded their hoteling program over time. Their people are more mobile today than they were 5 years ago, and this has created new investment pools of employees and opportunities to rebalance their real estate portfolio. There are 3 key economic drivers in my mind of why this is happening and why hoteling is a great business process to take advantage of. First, real estate is your second largest expense next to your people. Also, there's been many studies, and Marty mentioned as well, that it's vacant up to 40 to 50% of the time during a normal workday. Second key driver is knowledge workers and services are driving today's economic engine. Services continues to be a growing percent of our overall GDP. Last but not least, knowledge workers are no longer working in office cubes every day from 9 to 5. They are increasingly highly mobile, working from their homes, client sites, and third places. Technology and changing work models like telework are driving these trends. These trends have been happening for over a decade, but mobility and mobile technology has been accelerating over the last couple years. Just last month, we heard Yahoo's CEO announce that she was dropping the company's work from home policy. What an explosion in the news that became. We couldn't stop hearing about it for weeks. The recent event clearly supports the trend in mobility of the workforce is the new normal, and we no longer go to work in an office from 9 to 5. We simply work whenever, wherever we need to work. Recent studies from Stanford University and other organizations support this. We are a more engaged workforce, a more productive workforce, and have more work-life balance in this new model. So let's get to that model. The financial model needs some key data inputs, and I'll get to the spreadsheet after this. So using as specific data to your business as possible is going to create credibility to your financial model. But it's also okay to use assumptions and reference research studies based on some assumptions that you may make. Take a top-down approach to understanding your employee pools and your real estate portfolio. Marty went through a couple of them, like who would be good candidates for hoteling, professional services divisions, sales divisions, IT developers that do heads-down work, telecommuting from their home offices are good possible candidates. Where are your largest offices in your portfolio? Which offices are considered your hubs that may have more traffic of employees and visitors? And what leases are coming up for renewal in the next 12 to 18 months? Those are the areas to look for and target in developing this financial model. GSA, Cornet, Gartner, and others have published studies around the average cost of your office. Now, this is a fully loaded cost of occupancy, not just the real estate cost, and that's between $14,000 and $20,000 per workspace. That additional cost on top of the real estate could include outfitting the office with desks and communication equipment, maintenance, cleaning, energy, insurance, and acquisition and disposal costs. Then looking at the investment that you're going to need to make into the program, your biggest cost is likely going to be putting together your project team internally to develop and implement this hoteling program. Technology will make your hoteling program more user-friendly and increase adoption. Smartphone apps like Onboard's new iPhone app makes it easy for users to check in and find available space. I use it every day when I come into work and check into my office. I simply click right onto my iPhone and it works great. Digital signage is proliferating in the office environment, more options and at lower cost. Learning management systems on training staff on the new ways of working and hoteling business practices. And then some technology around building integrations, whether it's integrating with your security card system, voice over IP system, energy, lighting, network. These are all integral systems for presence detection, measurement, and reporting for occupancy analysis. You may need to equip certain employees with smartphones or laptops and tablets, so you'll want to build that into your budget. You want to go to your HR department and ask them if there's a work from home office policy and guidelines that you'll want to use to guide your cost analysis. And then training. You'll want to consider training managers for potential managing a distributed workforce, training new teleworkers on how to set up that home office and perform virtual work environment are just a couple examples. Okay, so here's the financial model or the economic model around hoteling, and it's a couple-step process that I took here. The first step would be create your baseline. So this model assumes you have 10,000 staff, you don't have a hoteling program, so they're on a one-to-one worker-to-workspace ratio, and I've used $15,000 as an average cost of an office, and I've projected modest growth in your employee population over the next 4 years. Step 2 is planning out your alternative workplace or hoteling model, the savings and investment criteria. So I took 10% assumption of your employee pool that's going to be hotelers at a 2-to-1 worker-to-workspace ratio. Step 3 would be calculating the metrics for your program. Now here you'll want to consider metrics that your company likes and uses routinely for evaluating new investments. It could be ROI, it could be payback period, discounted cash flow. Marty mentioned the metric of square foot per person, if that's a metric that your company likes to use. And this will make it easier for your company to evaluate this potential investment. But clearly you can see the leveraging effect of tweaking your worker to workspace ratio from a 1-to-1 to 1.4-to-1 over 4 years generates a healthy return on investment by implementing this kind of program. Other interesting metric would be the cost of delay of implementing an AWS program. Under this scenario, it would be about $18,000 per day if you delay this decision. So that's significant as well. So savings can fall into 3 categories. Type 1 would be hard dollar savings, which are directly measurable. You are able to move out of space. So your lease comes up for renewal, and instead of renewing for the 3 floors that you have, now you can renew for 2. So that's a direct hard dollar savings. Type 2 is cost avoidance savings. Expenses the company did not incur because you implemented hoteling. You were able to add staff to existing office space and did not have to lease an additional floor. Now this is what's interesting. If you're looking at this model alone, and all you do is don't add more space for the growth in your employees, that generates over the 4 years $45 million of occupancy cost savings, which is a 760% return on your investment. If that's all you do, you don't have to get out of space, you just avoid buying more space. So that's significant. A type 3 kind of savings, and it's a little more difficult to measure, it's not represented in this model, is a potential growth in revenue that results from a process improvement of increasing productivity of, say, a customer service staff that is now a teleworker. So I'll be, AgilQuest will provide a basic spreadsheet to the audience for completing the survey at the end of this presentation. So my second example here is a customer of ours that has implemented hoteling across their portfolio. They're fully expanded in all of their buildings and facilities and sites. They have a current ratio of 1.3-to-1, worker to workspace ratio, and they're refreshing not just the business case, but their workplace model. New employee pools, again, are opportunities for them to put into their hoteling program, and over the next 3 years, they'd like to take that worker to workspace ratio up to 1.5, 1.7, or 2-to-1. I think 1.7 is very achievable for them. 2-to-1 is probably a stretch goal for them. But looking at the annual occupancy cost savings of achieving $30 to $60 million of hitting those first 2 targets is significant, and that's on top of the $70 million annual savings that they're already achieving.
And that's an annual number.
Yeah.
So that's 30 or 60 every year.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay. So let's take it up to the CFO perspective. CFOs are focused on creating lasting shareholder value and increasing the market value of your company. The CFO will want to know, will this alternative investment option result in significantly increased shareholder value? So let's walk through this calculation. So in the first example, looking at 3 years, you were able to achieve a 20% reduction in your occupancy expense for about $33, $34 million that year. So translate that to how does that hit your net profit line? So there's a couple variables. First, what did the program cost, your investment? Deduct that from your savings, and then apply your effective tax rate, which I'm assuming is 35% here. That translates to a $21 million net profit impact. Then to translate that calculation up to the market value, I'm using the current S&P 500 average price earnings ratio of 18 times per last week's Wall Street Journal, and that translates to $374 million of market value creation for your company. Your CFO and leadership team is going to want to hear this story. They're going to want to understand how to achieve these results and the business case that supports it. So Wall Street's currently wrapping up its fourth quarter 2012 earnings reports this week. The S&P 500 are coming in at an average 6.2% higher than the prior year, according to Thomson Reuters research. Companies are going to need new, innovative, smart occupancy strategies like hoteling to continue to grow their earnings and stock prices. One other note that the CFO is going to get interested in very soon, and already is obviously, with the new lease accounting standards that have been discussed over the last several years. The FASB is currently going to produce a new exposure draft, re-exposing the lease accounting standards that it talked about in terms of taking operating leases that were disclosed in footnotes to financial statements and putting those on the balance sheet. So that exposure draft is due to be released to the public next quarter, and there will be a cycle of public comments come in, and then ultimately I expect that it will be likely that the FASB will issue new accounting regulations around this lease accounting. That will give CFOs and companies probably a year or two to implement the change, and that's going to have a material impact on another metric CFO tracks, which is return on assets. Return on assets is used by bankers and lenders in financial loan covenants that companies will have in place, and the financial analyst community looks at return on assets in terms of management's effectiveness in managing their assets and turning those assets into profitable enterprises. So they'll be able to benchmark across industry and across your competitors now with much more transparency on how you are managing your real estate assets.
And that change is roughly a year out from implementation?
Yeah, typically once the FASB will finalize the pronouncement and issue that and make that final, they'll give about a year or two to implement it. So looking back at the federal government, I've talked mostly about, corporations. The federal government, we all know, has a deficit challenge, but the U.S. federal government is the largest real estate property owner in the world. So anyone that can benefit from hoteling is them, and we are currently working with several agencies to implement their telework and hoteling programs along with smart occupancy, and they're taking great advantage of these programs in reducing the federal deficit and their property holdings. So it's not only the financial return that's important to your business case. There are several very significant additional benefits, some of which may be key in gaining buy-in for certain executives, lines of business, or others in your organization. They can be quantified as well in your business case using some external resources such as CO2 savings from telework or personal ROI. Kate Lister and her Telework Research Network website has a detailed personal ROI calculator and links to external resources with helpful information in that regard. These additional benefits become integral to the business case and ultimate vision and communication strategy to launch your program. Spend some time identifying which of these best fit into your organization and emphasize them in your business case. The Balanced Scorecard is an executive-level performance scorecard that CFOs are familiar with and like to see. It covers multiple disciplines and perspectives. CFOs want to see the whole picture and how it cascades through an organization. So first, identify what the key objective of your program is and put some measurements and targets to help gauge if you are achieving your goals. We've talked about the key objective of this program would be to increase shareholder value by reducing occupancy costs. For sound resource allocation, there has to be a clear and measurable value proposition. The Balanced Scorecard brings it all together. Hoteling is your financial leveraging strategy that will stop leaving money on your desk.
Well, Matt, thanks so much. Now we've got an opportunity for those of you who are on the call today to send your questions to Marty and Matt, and we'll answer as many of them as we can in the time that we have remaining here. So the very first question we have up here, Matt, I'm going to go ahead and throw this one at you because I think this is still something that, even from the CFO perspective, we can probably handle. We own a large portion of our space instead of leasing it. Do the models you're showing still apply?
Yeah, so a couple ways our models apply are, what you can do is you can achieve some portion of that office savings, the $15,000 to $20,000 per office, by shuttering floors and turning down entire buildings or wings, saving the energy, the maintenance type of costs. So that is one thing that you can do. If you could possibly sublet space, that would be another opportunity to reduce your costs by subletting. And there's definitely some cost savings that you can still achieve.
Terrific. The next question here: what if we don't have highly accurate cost per office? What if we don't have highly accurate cost per office data? Can we? I guess they're asking if we can't plug into the spreadsheet the highly accurate data, can we still use it in some kind of way? Is it still possible to use the model, or do we? What are our first couple of steps?
Yeah, so that's one of the key assumptions that you can make, and you can use and reference the GSA, CoreNet, IFMA, Gartner. There's a number of studies. We can certainly help you with that information and the research sources that are available out on the web that will support that when you take the business case to your CFO and real estate departments, and then solicit their input and help into gathering that information, because if you don't have it available, which is likely the case for most cases, they'll be able to help you with that.
And we just got a question here at the bottom of the queue, but it's along those same lines, just maybe an extension of it. So how common is it for an organization to have existing space standards, both on the commercial and the federal side, meaning a set office workspace size based on the employee title or level? How common is that?
I would say that's pretty common still. That's kind of the same mindset of having one worker to one workspace. You have a standard. A lot of people look, the old style would be to come in and try to make that workspace smaller. But looking at the real estate portfolio being underutilized, you don't need to make workspaces smaller to reduce that square foot per person. What you do is you optimize the current real estate and let them have the nice size office and the appropriate level workspace instead of putting them in smaller and smaller workspaces.
Right. If I remember correctly, when you were taking our internal elaborated version of the economic model and getting it small enough and simple enough to put on that PowerPoint, there was a line in there for the space standard. And for some reason, I was thinking that the space standard, that space was staying the exact same throughout that 5-year period. Is that the amount of space that's being allocated?
For an office, yes. But the average, as you put more people through the program, so you're increasing your worker to workspace ratio, will drive down, and this is Marty's metric, was the square foot per person then. So a square foot per person is different than the square foot that they plan an office space to be used.
Gotcha. And then the second part of this question was how important is having the standards or having them as a prerequisite before you start implementing hoteling? What it sounds to me like is that it's nice to have those space standards in place, but for the most common type of hoteling implementation, I guess it doesn't sound like it's a prerequisite. It wouldn't be required.
Now, many times what we see in our clients is the real estate departments definitely have space standards that they use in terms of planning out the space, the allocated space, but hoteling operations many times is working with the existing space layout and facility makeup and really trying to get more butts and seats rather than having just one in an office.
I remember Marty's butts in boxes comment very clearly. Next question here is, you talked about AWS investment cost. So they're asking, can you detail a little bit more about what's behind those investment cost numbers?
Yeah, absolutely. So within the financial model, you'll break down, and I kind of went through the cost variables, and the people side will be probably the heaviest cost, the internal employees that are going to run the program. You're going to want some real estate participation. You're going to need to add some employees for like hoteling coordinators, concierges. You may be able to leverage some internal staff, but over time, as your program picks up in volume, you're going to have to add incremental people. It could be one hoteling coordinator or concierge per floor would be a model to include into your model.
Gotcha. And one of the really, it almost sounds like an AgilQuest question here, but this came from the audience. How important is it to understand your actual utilization, your occupancy? Is it important enough to start off with sensors and integration with badging systems to know exactly how many people are coming and using the space, or not?
Yeah, utilization is another very interesting metric and useful in terms of understanding what your actual use is, and that will help you identify the key areas, whether it's facilities that are being underutilized that need to implement a hoteling program, or the certain types of workers that have shifted from permanent space allocation. So they came in the office every day 2-3 years ago, but now, after looking at actual use of space data, you find that these employee groups have shifted to the mobile population, and that helps you identify where to target your hoteling. AgilQuest's perspective is to leverage existing building systems as much as possible. So if there's a security badge system, leverage that business process and data that you're already capturing and build that and bring that into an integrated measurement system to measure the use of your space. So you can add sensors, you can add digital signage, you can add a lot of things to capture that, but if you can connect to your network presence devices, presence using a smartphone, iPhone app and having somebody check in easily, or when they swipe into the building for the security system, capturing that data that's already resident in your organization and putting it into a database to measure the occupancy rate and utilization is very helpful.
Fantastic. The next question here sounds more like a services side question, but do you use any tools to assess organizational or cultural readiness to implement hoteling concepts?
Yes, that would be our workplace services division, that we can help management decide on their readiness as an organization. We'll do focus groups, we'll survey employee pilot population, piloting hoteling and those populations to see how the program went after the pilot, and come back and reassess what went right, what went wrong, how to improve and roll out the program after that.
If I remember correctly, that's the one that shows graphs on what percentage of the population feels they're more productive, what percentage feels they're still delivering the same amount of customer service or answering customer questions. Is that the surveys that you're talking about?
Yeah, and we've done a lot of those surveys with our clients, and typically we will have above 90% satisfaction ratings after a pilot of the new system.
Excellent. This is a really interesting question here. How does space use relate to improvements in employee performance and productivity, not just on the improvement in lease and energy costs? So it sounds to me like they're asking questions along the lines of the human capital side of these changes, the benefits on that side, as well as probably some of the personal ROI.
Yeah, that's very important, because the last thing you want to do is disrupt your revenue generators. Talking about one of the key drivers being service people and the services and knowledge workers, they're producing your revenue. So you want to make your program as easy to use and adopt as possible. Productivity is, sometimes hard to measure if you put in a new program and identify, did that customer service rep that's teleworking from home, you can measure her or him by how many calls did they take. So if they're talking to customers more during the day because they didn't have to go into the office, commute in there, they were stuck in traffic, they have to go around the office and find, I'm on the second shift, which office is available for me to go sit in. You've just reduced a bunch of friction in your business, so that will increase the productivity of your people, as well as the studies that say they're happier. Your people are more engaged and therefore more productive with this new way of working.
Perfect. The next question here I can answer. It's a logistic question. Matt mentioned that the basic version of our economic model we would be providing to the folks who finished the survey, and that's going to come at the end of the webinar. So just watch out for that survey. Make sure you answer those questions, and we'll make sure that we get it to you. The next question here, it looks like Marty's still having trouble dialing back in. So Matt, I'm going to hand you this question and see if you can answer it. Quote, how do you figure parking into the scenarios where large public transportation options are not available? How does that change the number of people that can be assigned to a building but not assigned a seat?
Well, I don't think it does, because your building only has so much capacity, which the parking is aligned to already to some degree. So it's not like you're putting in one day 110% of capacity. You're still just operating your building at higher utilization rates rather than 40 or 50% utilization of that office space. You're getting it up to 60, 70, 80, 90%. But the parking facilities around a building typically will match the capacity of the building.
Back from when they were one-to-one, when they were planned out at one-to-one.
Correct.
Okay. So you may end up at higher utilization, but it won't be more people physically in that building. All right. The next question we have here, do you have any large tech companies that are currently using the hoteling model?
Large tech company examples. Probably the best case example of that today would be a large communications company. They're very technical. I don't want to provide any real customer names here, but we are aggressively working with, they're a Fortune 50 tech company. So they're Fortune 50, extremely large, brand name, everyone would recognize them, one of the largest communication companies in the world. They're aggressively rolling out their hoteling program. We're working very close with them since last year. They have aggressive goals to get this program launched. They're already in the UK, in the US. I'm not sure what other countries they may have rolled out into already, but yes, we do have several clients in the high-tech community. Those are the knowledge workers that are teleworking at home. So that's a prime employee pool and population that has great potential for hoteling.
And I would imagine that companies that are perhaps fit that definition of tech even more, a software company or some kind of widget company, would be even more adept, more ready to adopt mobility, if not already there. And now it's just an opportunity for the management of that company to come up to speed. As Marty was saying, culture of the organization and management of the assets coming up to speed of where the employees already are.
Yeah, one of the largest tech companies in the world, IBM, was really the pioneer of this business process, hoteling, and that's where our CEO and founder, John Vivadelli, came from. So IBM has a competitive advantage and has enjoyed that competitive advantage against all of its competitors for a number of years, decades, literally decades, probably 2 decades now, of reducing their real estate portfolio and saving probably close to $1 billion. They're one of the examples of a company that has leveraged their worker-to-workspace ratio up to a 14 worker to 1 desk ratio. IBM is the poster child for a tech company that has done this well.
we're getting some additional kind of clarifications or refinements on a particular question. The person asking the question is asking us to, there are examples of people who have a large engineering or engineer workforce, and then additionally with dedicated computers. So I know that one of the big customers has scientists in laboratories where we're hoteling them. So I'm assuming that would be along the exact same kind of lines, where I am person X and I have not a assigned desk maybe, but a workstation, a particular piece of equipment. Is there anything you can share about that particular customer without revealing the name that would help with the large tech company's question?
Well, if I'm understanding the question correctly, that they have certain special equipment needs and those equipment needs are in the office, then they're likely going to be the ones that are still going to have a permanent space. You're going to have some part of your employee pool still go in the office every day and work from there. There's nothing wrong with that. There's just a very large percent of your employee pools right now that are mobile, and that mobility is increasing rapidly. So you can't hotel everybody. That's not what we ever suggest, but over time, technology finds a way to enable people to be more mobile. So we probably didn't think 10 years ago that we would be, checking into our reservation system on an iPhone app, but here we are, and I do it every day.
Me too. I'm so pleased that we have that thing now. It makes my life a lot easier. And the very last question we have time for here, I think we can do this pretty quickly. What are the typical methods to determine the employee pools or work styles that are best suited to adopt hoteling? Is this one of the commander style reports?
Sorry, can you
for identifying which candidates are best suited for moving to hoteling or mobile work?
I could actually answer that question is look at exactly the kind of work people do, and this goes back to one of the earlier questions about space standards by management level or job title. You really need to move to much more functional types of assignments. So if someone's really just working on a screen all day or spending a lot of time on their phone or working on a remote team, they don't necessarily have to come to the central place of work every day. So those kinds of jobs where people are doing pretty solitary type of work, and they want to telework, or they want to have more flexibility and not do the commute or be able to have more control over their hours. Those are ideal jobs. Also sales and service, a lot of jobs where most of the time you're doing your job, you should be out of the office with customers or moving from location to location. Those are other jobs that are very easy to become hoteling types of jobs. So you really need to understand how people sort of move through space and time, like that early framework we showed, and how they best can use the space, what kind of space they really need to do their job.
Excellent, thank you. Another question here that perhaps you can answer really quickly. What's the basis for the statement 40% of real estate is empty?
Well, that's a funny rule. It's been around for a while. There's been a number of different research projects where people have gone in and watched how often a workstation is used, and some people would say workstations are only used, 30% of the time. In our experience at Corporate Portfolio Analytics, when we've gone in and looked at large portfolios, and I'm actually en route to work with a large public sector portfolio right now, we're finding people have 40% too much space. That a lot of larger companies in particular, or more older industries, are 300 plus or more square foot per person, and we just know if that's administrative office work, that's nowhere near the amount of, that's way more than the amount of space that technology companies and other more high performance types of workplaces are using. So it's a rule of thumb that I have taken, personally seen companies get out of 40% of their space over the last 6 or 7 years.
Okay, very good. And Marty, do you have another minute or two? Can we repose one of those questions that you might be able to elaborate on a bit?
Sure, if you'd like.
That'd be fantastic. So The big question, the two questions I have in here, are there any particular tools that you use for assessing cultural or organizational readiness for workplace change?
Well, we have a survey that we use that feeds into our demand forecasting model that asks people how they actually use technology, how their use of technology may be changing, how they sort of spend their everyday workday. I think in terms of organizational readiness and culture, that's a whole other set of processes around change management, getting your stakeholders identified and getting senior management on board early on. So there's a whole change management process around bringing these ideas to an organization. But in terms of a survey tool, we do have a tool that really looks at how people are working now and how they think that work might change in the future that then helps feed the demand forecasting model.
Gotcha. Okay. And just the last question here before we wrap up, Marty. We had a question about how important was it important to have space standards set for your organization before you started doing the pre-change analysis, and I was just thinking that would probably be something you'd want to chime in on. So is it important to have space standards across your organization before you jump into large workplace change?
I don't believe so. I mean, if you have them, probably they aren't relevant to how people are working today because traditionally organizations have set space standards by job title, you know, vice president, director, senior manager, that kind of thing, and really it's much more about the type of work that people do. Some administrative assistants might need more space than an executive because they're controlling a lot of paper or printed documents or have a lot of other materials that they need to manage. So again, you can take your existing space standards, but I would really encourage organizations to kind of get out of the mindset of assigning space according to level and management hierarchy and really try to understand the work that people do. We use 4 categories of space. We look at residents. Those are people who are at an assigned workstation and spend most of their time every day at an assigned workstation based on the kind of work they do. We have mobile internal. That's people who most of the time do come into the office and need to come into the office, but more of their time is spent in meetings and in collaboration than is spent at an individual heads-down workstation. The third category is mobile external. Those are people who do come into the office but spend more than half of their time outside of the office, whether they're working from home, they're working from a third place, they're out servicing clients or other activities that take them out of the office. That's the mobile external. And we found it's really helpful still to have the 4th category of executive. So we do have that kind of a special number. Okay, the executives might have more space per person than everyone else. Typically, they only make up 5% of the workforce, so we tend to carry that as a separate category. So when we work on these demand forecasting models, we really try to simplify the operations to those resident, mobile internal, mobile external, and executive.
That's really fascinating. I'd love to see the presentation specifically on that demand forecasting tool and model. It sounds like an extraordinarily powerful and useful tool. All right. Well,
what we've had liked is that that the C-suite understands it. They understand. Then they can see where your assumptions come from, and it's the power of small numbers over time become large numbers.
Fantastic. Well, we've gone past our time here. I want to thank our 2 panelists today, Martha OMara from Corporate Portfolio Analytics and Matthew Fahy from AgilQuest. And, of course, thank you to everybody who attended. Please keep your eyes open on your inbox for the next AgilQuest Workplace Leaders webinar. And thank you so much. Everybody had a great day.